The rain was a solid thing, a percussive assault against the carriage roof that had long since obliterated any sense of rhythm. It was just noise now, a relentless, roaring void that mirrored the one inside Alastair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood. For 5 years, his life had been a study in silence, a vast, echoing manor filled with the ghosts of words he should have said and the specter of a woman he had thrown away. He stared out the window, but the glass was a streaming, distorted mess of gray and green. The world outside was dissolving. It felt appropriate. His own world had dissolved 5 years, 3 months, and 11 days ago. He counted the days. He always counted the days. It was a form of penance, a rosary of regret he recited in the hollow chambers of his heart each night before sleep refused to take him. The carriage lurched, a sickening slide in the mud, and then jolted to a halt. Alastair did not move. He simply waited for the inevitable. John Coachman, a man who had served his father before him, opened the door, his face a grim mask of apology under a torrent of water. "Your Grace," the man shouted over the deluge, "the road's washed out ahead. A proper river it is. We'll not get through tonight." Alastair's gaze remained fixed on the churning landscape. He felt nothing. Not annoyance, not frustration. Just a continuation of the same dull ache that had become his constant companion. "Is there an inn?" "Aye, Your Grace. A small place, the Weary Traveller, about a 1/4 mile back. It's rustic." The unspoken word was unsuitable. "It will have to do," Alastair said, his voice flat. He stepped out of the carriage, the cold shock of the rain and wind a welcome distraction. It was real. It was something to feel other than the grinding millstone of his own failure. The mud sucked at his polished boots, an indignity that would have enraged him 6 years ago. Now it was just mud. The inn was precisely as John Coachman had described it. Rustic. It sagged a little to one side, as if exhausted from its long battle with the elements. The sign, depicting a man slumped over a tankard, swung on one hinge, groaning with each gust of wind. Smoke, thick and smelling of damp wood, curled from a stone chimney, a fragile beacon in the tempest. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of stew, ale, and wet wool. A fire crackled in a great hearth, its light dancing over the dark, scarred wood of the tables and the weary faces of a few locals nursing their drinks. He stood in the doorway, water pooling around his feet, a creature of another world. The chatter died. All eyes turned to him, noting the fine cut of his traveling coat, the expensive leather of his boots, the unmistakable air of authority that clung to him like a shroud. He was the Duke of Blackwood, and even here, in this forgotten corner of the world, that meant something. It meant power. It meant privilege. It meant nothing at all. A stout woman with flour on her apron and kindness in her eyes bustled forward. "My lord, come in. Come in out of that dreadful storm. We don't have much, but you're welcome to the fire and a hot meal." Alastair gave a curt nod, his social armor clicking into place without conscious thought. "My man will see to the arrangements. I require a private room." "We only have the one, my lord," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "But it's clean and the bed is dry." He was about to protest, to demand better, but the sheer exhaustion of the last 5 years settled over him. What did it matter? He had slept in a 4-poster bed draped in silks and velvets every night, and had not known a moment's rest. A dry bed in a hovel sounded like a luxury. "It will suffice." As he shrugged off his heavy, sodden coat, a small shape detached itself from the shadows near the hearth. A boy. He could not have been more than 5 or 6 years old, with a mop of unruly dark hair and a serious, concentrated expression on his face. "I can take that, sir," the boy said, his voice small but clear, reaching up with 2 hands to grasp the heavy garment. Alastair looked down, a flicker of impatience stirring. He was not accustomed to being served by children. He wanted a brandy and a quiet corner to drown in his memories, but the innkeeper's wife was already nodding encouragingly at the boy. "Go on, Thomas. Hang it by the fire to dry. Mind you don't get too close." The boy, Thomas, grunted with the effort of dragging the coat across the floor. Alistair's gaze followed him, and it was then, as the child turned his head to look back at his mother, that the firelight caught his face in perfect profile. The Duke stopped breathing. The world tilted, the roaring of the storm outside fading to a distant hum, the heat of the fire, the smell of the stew, the curious stares of the patrons. It all vanished. There was only the boy, and his eyes. They were not brown, like his mother the innkeeper. They were not blue, like the few other men in the room. They were a peculiar, specific shade of gray, a tempestuous gray, the color of a winter sky over the North Sea, flecked with shards of silver. They were Alistair's eyes. He knew those eyes. He saw them every morning in his shaving mirror, a reflection of his own cold disappointment. He had inherited them from his father, and his father from the first Duke of Blackwood, a hard man who had carved his title out of war and politics. The Beaumont eyes, unmistakable, unforgettable, impossible. A cold dread, far more chilling than the storm, washed over him. It was a coincidence. It had to be. A freak of nature, a trick of the firelight. But his heart, that useless atrophied organ, began to pound against his ribs with a force that stole his breath. He took a half-step forward, his hand outstretched as if to touch the boy, to confirm he was real. The innkeeper's wife, seeing his strange expression, mistook it for concern. "Don't you worry, my lord. He's a careful boy. He'll not harm your coat." But Alistair did not hear her. His mind was a maelstrom, flashing back to another storm, an emotional hurricane that had torn his life apart. He saw a ballroom, glittering with 1,000 candles, the air thick with perfume and poison. He saw his wife, Alara, her face pale, her eyes wide with a confusion that he, in his blind arrogance, had mistaken for guilt. He saw his cousin Frederick's face, a mask of concerned sympathy, whispering venom into his ear. "I saw them, Alistair, in the gardens, an embrace. It was more than an embrace. A forged letter, a paid-off footman with a well-rehearsed lie, and Alistair's own damnable pride had done the rest. He had believed the lie because it was easier than believing in the quiet, gentle woman he had married. He had wanted a duchess, a perfect ornament for his title. He had not known how to love the woman, the public accusation, the shattering of glass as a champagne flute slipped from someone's hand, the collective gasp of the ton, and Alara, standing alone in the center of it all, not crying, not pleading, just looking at him with a profound, bottomless disappointment that had haunted him ever since. He had told her to leave, to be gone from his sight and his house by morning, and she had. She had vanished, not to her family, who had disowned her in the scandal, not to any friends. She had simply disappeared from the face of the earth, taking nothing but a small purse of her own money and the clothes she wore. He had told himself it was proof of her guilt. For 5 years, he had clung to that lie, that brittle shield against the horrifying possibility that he had destroyed an innocent woman, his wife. The investigation had started a year ago, born of a gnawing, undeniable doubt. Frederick had grown too comfortable, too greedy in his new position as Alistair's heir presumptive. A careless word here, a flash of triumph in his eyes there. Alistair had hired a man, a discreet inquiry agent from London, who had slowly, painstakingly unpicked the tapestry of lies. The footman was found, dying of consumption in a London slum, and for the price of a priest and a decent burial, he had confessed everything. The letter was a forgery. The rendezvous in the garden never happened. It was all Frederick, all of it. The truth had not set Alistair free. It had imprisoned him in a new, more terrible hell, the hell of knowing. "Thomas, come here, please." The voice cut through his memories like a shard of ice. It was a woman's voice, quiet but laced with an authority that was absolute. It came from the doorway leading to the kitchens. Alistair's head snapped up. She stepped out of the shadows and into the firelight. The years had changed her, but he would have known her in the deepest pit of hell. Her hair, once styled in elaborate coiffures, was now pulled back in a simple, severe bun. Her hands, which had once known only the touch of silk and the cool weight of jewels, were chapped and red. She wore a plain dress of dark wool, worn thin at the elbows. She was thinner, the soft curves of her youth honed into sharp, resilient lines. But it was her. It was Ilara. His Ilara. The wife he had condemned, the woman he had been searching for without hope for the past year. Here, in a roadside inn, serving ale to farmers. She saw him then. Her eyes, the warm, gentle brown he had once dismissed as unremarkable, widened for a fraction of a second. The color drained from her face, leaving it a stark, beautiful canvas of shock. A plate she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, complete silence of the room. The boy, Thomas, ran to her side, clutching her skirts. "Mama! Mama!" The word was a physical blow. Alistair felt the air leave his lungs. He looked from Ilara's pale, defiant face to the boy clinging to her legs. The boy with his eyes. The math was simple. It was brutal. 5 years since she had left. The boy was 5. His son. The knowledge crashed down on him with the force of a physical collapse. He staggered back a step, his hand finding the rough-hewn surface of a table to steady himself. This was not just a woman he had wronged. This was the mother of his child, his heir. A boy raised in obscurity, in poverty, while his father rotted in a palace of gold and guilt. Ilara recovered first. Her shock hardened into a cold, protective fury. She put a hand on Thomas's head, pushing him gently behind her, shielding him from Alistair's gaze. Her eyes met his across the room, and there was no fear in them. There was no pleading. There was only a glacial wall of contempt. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low and trembling with a rage she fought to control. Alistair opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Such paltry words for a crime of this magnitude. They were insults. He saw the innkeeper's wife, Martha, looking between them, her brow furrowed in confusion. He saw the locals staring, sensing a drama far more compelling than their ale. "Your Grace?" Martha said tentatively. "Do you know Eleanor?" Eleanor, the name she had taken, a new life, a life without him, a life he had forced upon her. "We are acquainted," Alistair managed to say, his voice a rough rasp. The lie was absurd. He felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. Acquainted. He was married to her. He was the father of her child. Ilara's chin lifted. "The gentleman is mistaken. I have never seen him before in my life. Now, if you will excuse me." She turned, her back ramrod straight, and guided Thomas toward the kitchen. It was a dismissal as absolute and as devastating as the one he had given her 5 years ago. He watched her go, the space she occupied now painfully empty. The fire crackled, oblivious. The storm raged, a pale imitation of the tempest inside him. He had found her, and in finding her, he had finally understood the true depth of what he had lost. It was not just his wife. It was his son, his honor, his soul. John Coachman appeared at his elbow. "The room is ready, Your Grace. It's upstairs." Alistair nodded numbly, allowing himself to be led away from the public room. As he climbed the narrow creaking stairs, he could feel every eye in the inn on his back. They saw a duke, a powerful man inconvenienced by a storm. They had no idea they were watching a ghost climb the stairs to his own private purgatory. The room was small, dominated by a simple bed with a patchwork quilt. A single candle flickered on a small table, casting long, dancing shadows. The rain hammered against the window pane. He did not remove his clothes. He walked to the window and stared out into the black, churning night. He had found her. The first part of his quest was over. But as he looked at his own spectral reflection in the glass, a face he barely recognized, he knew the far harder part had just begun. He had to make her listen. And in a world where he had all the power, all the wealth, all the privilege, he had never felt so utterly powerless. He had to find a way to tear down the walls she had built around her heart, walls that he himself had given her the stone and mortar to construct. Downstairs, in the small, steamy kitchen, Alara sank onto a stool, her body trembling. She pulled Thomas onto her lap, hugging him so tightly he squirmed in protest. "Mama, you're squeezing," he complained. "I'm sorry, my love," she whispered into his hair, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of him. Wood smoke and boy, her world. Martha came in, her face a mixture of concern and boundless curiosity. "Eleanor, who was that man? The way he looked at you, and at the boy." Alara could not bring herself to lie to this woman who had been more of a mother to her than her own had ever been. Martha had taken her in 5 years ago, a half-starved, desperate wraith with nothing but a few coins and a secret growing in her belly. She had asked no questions, offering a job, a room, and a quiet, unshakable kindness that had saved Alara's life. "He is from my past, Martha," Alara said, her voice barely audible. "A past I thought I had buried." "He's the boy's father, isn't he?" Martha asked gently, her eyes full of a wisdom that saw through all pretenses. Alara could only nod, a tear she had refused to shed in front of him, finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. "Well," Martha said, bustling over to the stove and stirring the stew with renewed vigor, a gesture of determined normalcy. "He's got a storm to wait out, and so do we." The words hung in the air. This was not a fleeting encounter. He was here, trapped by the weather, a prisoner in the sanctuary she had built. The storm outside was nothing. The true storm was about to break, right here, within the four walls of the weary traveler. And Alara, who had survived so much, had to find the strength to face it. She held her son tighter, her only shield against the man upstairs, who had the power to destroy her all over again. Alistair did not sleep. He sat in the single wooden chair in his room, listening to the sounds of the inn, the murmur of voices from the taproom below, the creak of the floorboards, the ceaseless drumming of the rain. Each sound was a reminder of where he was, of who was under this same roof. He traced the lines of his life, trying to find the exact moment he had gone so wrong. Was it when he first listened to Frederick's insinuations? Or was it long before that, in a childhood where emotion was a weakness and duty was a god? He had courted Alara because she was suitable, an earl's daughter, beautiful, poised, quiet. She would be a perfect duchess. He had never once stopped to ask what she wanted, who she was beneath the placid surface. He had treated her like a prize bull acquired for his estate, a fine addition to his collection, and he had been surprised when the prize had a heart he had then proceeded to grind into dust. The first hint of a gray, watery dawn crept through the window. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle. He stood, his joints stiff, his body aching with a weariness that was soul-deep. He had to speak to her, not as a duke to a commoner, but as a man to the woman he had wronged. He had no plan, no carefully crafted words. They would be useless anyway. All he had was the truth, a truth that was 5 years too late. He made his way downstairs. The inn was quiet, the air stale with the ghosts of last night's pipe smoke. He found her in the kitchen, kneading dough on a floured wooden board. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong, capable forearms. The sight of her performing such a mundane, physical task was a fresh shock. The Duchess of Blackwood, whose hands were once sketched by artists, was now baking the morning's bread. She did not look up when he entered, though he knew she was aware of his presence. The rhythmic press and fold of her hands on the dough was the only sound. "Ilara," he began, his voice rough. Her hands stilled. She finally raised her eyes, and they were as cold and hard as river stones. "My name is Eleanor, and you have no right to be in this kitchen, Your Grace." The title was a weapon, a shard of glass meant to cut him, to remind him of the chasm between them. "Please," he said, taking a step closer. "We must talk." "We have nothing to talk about. You made your feelings perfectly clear 5 years ago. I was to be gone from your sight. So be gone." She turned her back on him, resuming her work with a furious, controlled energy. "The boy," he pressed, his voice cracking on the word. "He is my son." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a truth that had settled into his bones. She slammed the dough onto the board. "He is my son. He has my name. He has my protection. He has needed nothing from you for 5 years, and he needs nothing from you now." "He has my eyes," Alistair said quietly. That stopped her. Her shoulders slumped for a barest second, a crack in the armor. "He is a good boy. He is happy. He is safe. I will not let you ruin him as you ruined me." The accusation landed with the force of a physical blow. Ruined. It was the correct word. He had taken her reputation, her family, her home, her name. He had cast her out into the world with nothing. That she had not only survived, but built a life, raised a child. It was a miracle of fortitude he could scarcely comprehend. "I know the truth, Ilara," he said, his voice urgent. "About Frederick, about the lies. I have proof." She turned slowly, her face a mask of disbelief and bitter irony. "You have proof? Now? After 5 years of me living as a fallen woman, a disgrace? After 5 years of my son being a bastard with no name? Your proof is a little late, Your Grace. It is of no use to me now." "It is of use to me," he said, his own desperation rising. "It is of use to our son. He is the heir to the Blackwood title. He should not be living in—" He stopped himself, gesturing vaguely at the humble kitchen. Her laugh was a brittle, ugly sound. "Living in what? An honest home? Surrounded by people who care for him? You think your world of gilded cages and whispering vipers is better for him? You think a father who would believe a lie and condemn his pregnant wife without a single question is what he needs?" Pregnant. She had known. He had cast out his wife while she was carrying his child. A wave of nausea so profound washed over him that he gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. The sheer, monstrous scale of his cruelty was laid bare. He had not just wronged a woman, he had endangered his own unborn son. "I did not know," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Of course you didn't know," she shot back, her voice rising with years of pent-up fury. "You never looked at me. You never truly saw me. I was a decoration, a part of the Blackwood estate. Did you notice the morning sickness? The weariness? No. You were too busy with your horses and your politics and your cousin." She spat the word. He had no defense. She was right. He had been absent long before he had been cruel. He had been a stranger in his own marriage. "Let me atone for it," he pleaded, the word tearing from his throat. It was the first time in his adult life he had ever pleaded for anything. "Let me make it right. For you. For him." "How?" she challenged, her arms crossed over her chest. "How can you possibly make this right? Will you turn back time? Will you give Thomas the 5 years he should have had with a father? Will you erase the shame and the fear and the hunger of that first year? You cannot fix this with your title or your money. Some things, once broken, cannot be mended." The kitchen door opened, and Thomas stood there, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his small face clouded with confusion. "Mama? Why are you shouting?" Ilara's fury dissolved in an instant, replaced by a fierce, maternal tenderness. She knelt, opening her arms, and the boy ran into them. She held him close, her face buried in his hair, her body a shield between her son and his father. Alistair stood frozen, a spectator to a life he should have been a part of. He was watching a scene of love and intimacy that he had no right to witness, let alone join. The boy peeked over his mother's shoulder, his gray eyes, so like Alistair's, regarding him with a child's open curiosity. There was no judgment in them, no anger, just a question. "Who are you?" It was a question Alistair did not know how to answer. He backed out of the kitchen slowly, a silent retreat. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser in their lives. He had come here with some vague notion of restoration, of command. He would find her, explain the situation, and she would, of course, return with him to Blackwood Manor. Her name would be cleared, the boy would be acknowledged, and the natural order of things would be restored. How arrogant he had been, how utterly, profoundly stupid. He saw it now. Her life was not broken. It was his that was in ruins. She had built something real here, something honest, from the wreckage he had made. He could not simply command her to abandon it. He had no right to ask for anything. He spent the day in a state of purgatory. The storm did not abate. He was trapped. He watched from a distance as Eleanor went about her day. She served the patrons. She swept the floors. She laughed with Martha. She was competent, respected, needed. And in every spare moment, she was with Thomas, reading to him by the fire, helping him with a small wooden puzzle, ruffling his dark hair. Alistair saw the easy affection between mother and son, the unspoken language of love and trust, and each glance was a fresh turn of the knife in his gut. He was a ghost at the feast of their lives. He tried to approach the boy once, when he was playing near the hearth. He knelt, his knees protesting the unaccustomed movement. "Hello, Thomas," he said, his voice hoarse. The boy looked up, his gray eyes unnervingly direct. "Hello, sir." "That is a fine-looking horse," Alistair said, gesturing to the crudely carved wooden toy in the boy's hand. "His name is Captain," Thomas said matter-of-factly. "Mama made him for me." Of course she did. Ilara, who had once embroidered impossibly intricate patterns on silk, now carved toys from scraps of wood. "He is very handsome." Alistair searched for something else to say, something a father might say to a son, but the words were foreign to him. He had no experience, no script for this. "Do you like horses?" "I like Captain," the boy said, as if it were the only horse in the world that mattered. He then turned his attention back to his toy, the conversation, for him, clearly over. The dismissal was so complete, so innocent, that it was more cutting than any of Ilara's anger. That evening, as the light faded and the lamps were lit, Alistair cornered Ilara by the stairs. He had to try again. "I am not leaving," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not until you have heard me out." She sighed, a weary put-upon sound that grated on his raw nerves. "I have heard you. You made a mistake. You are sorry. Your apology is noted and dismissed. Now, please, let us go on with our lives." "This is not just about an apology," he insisted. "This is about justice. Frederick cannot be allowed to get away with what he did. To you. To us." "His punishment is of no concern to me," she said flatly. "My only concern is my son." "He is my son, too." The words burst out of him, louder than he intended. "A biological fact you have been blissfully unaware of for 5 years, she retorted, her voice a furious whisper. "You don't get to claim him now, just because you stumbled into him by accident. Fatherhood is more than a shared eye color. It is being there. It is scraped knees and bedtime stories and chasing away nightmares. Where were you for all of that? He flinched. I was a fool. I was blind and proud, and I let another man poison my mind. I cannot change that. God knows I would if I could. But I can change the future. Our son should have his birthright. He should have his name. He has a name, Thomas. It is a good, strong name. He does not need yours. The finality in her voice was like a door slamming shut in his face. He realized then that she was not just angry. She was terrified. She was terrified that he would use his power, his position, to take the boy from her. And he knew with a sickening certainty that the Alistair of 5 years ago would have done just that. The law would have been on his side. A child, especially an heir, belonged to the father. He had to show her that he was not that man anymore. I will not take him from you, Elara, he said, his voice soft, desperate for her to believe him. I swear it. On my father's grave, I swear it. I want to be allowed to know him, to earn his trust, and yours. She searched his face, her eyes narrowed, looking for the lie, the trick. He held her gaze, letting her see the raw, unvarnished truth of his desperation and his regret. He stripped away the ducal mask, the arrogance, the pride. He stood before her as nothing more than a broken man, begging for a chance he knew he did not deserve. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something other than contempt in her eyes. It was not forgiveness. It was not even acceptance. It was a sliver of weary uncertainty. The storm is supposed to break tomorrow, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. You will be able to leave then. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the shadows of the stairwell. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. It was a reprieve. He had until the road was clear. One day, perhaps two, to prove that he was not the monster she remembered. The next morning, Alistair came downstairs, dressed not in his fine traveling clothes, but in a simple shirt and breeches borrowed from the innkeeper. He found Martha in the yard, struggling to chop a pile of wet, stubborn logs. John Coachman, ever proper, was attempting to assist, but his skills were clearly more suited to managing horses than an axe. Without a word, Alistair took the axe from the innkeeper's wife. He ignored her protestations and the coachman's scandalized expression. He set a log on the block and swung the axe. The wood was slick, the impact jarring. He was clumsy at first, his muscles unaccustomed to the labor, but he persisted. He worked through the morning, the rhythmic thud of the axe a counterpoint to the drip of water from the eaves. His hands, soft and manicured, blistered, then broke open. He barely noticed the pain. It was a welcome, honest hurt. It was real. Elara watched him from the kitchen window. She told herself it was a performance, a duke playing at being a common man for her benefit. But there was no audience for him in the muddy yard, just the woodpile and the rain. He worked with a grim, relentless determination that she had only ever seen him apply to his estate ledgers. He did not stop for rest. He did not complain. He just chopped. Thomas came and stood beside her, his nose pressed against the cool glass. The man is cutting our wood, Mama. Yes, he is, she said, her voice tight. Is he very strong? She looked at Alistair's broad back, the muscles of his shoulders straining against the damp fabric of his shirt. He was strong. She had forgotten that. She had only remembered the coldness, the cutting words. She had forgotten the physical presence of him. Yes, Thomas. I suppose he is. Later that day, the stable roof began to leak, a steady drip turning into a cascade right over the stall where the inn's only horse was kept. The innkeeper, a man whose back was bent with age and arthritis, looked up at the hole with despair. Alistair, hearing the commotion, appeared at his side. I can fix that. Before anyone could argue, He had found a ladder and was climbing onto the slippery, moss-covered slates, a hammer and a handful of nails clenched between his teeth. He worked carefully, methodically, replacing the dislodged tiles, his movements sure and economical. He was soaked to the skin, his borrowed clothes covered in mud and grime. He was the Duke of Blackwood. He owned 3 castles, a London mansion, and half a county, and he was on his hands and knees on a leaky stable roof in the middle of nowhere, fixing it with his own 2 hands. Elara stood in the stable doorway, a bucket in her hand, and watched him. This man was a stranger to her. The man she had married would have summoned an army of workmen with a flick of his wrist. He would never have sullied his own hands. This man was different. He was not trying to impress her with his wealth or his power. He was trying to be useful. It was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she knew about him, that it chipped another piece from the icy wall around her heart. When he finally climbed down, shivering with cold, she was standing there with a mug of hot, steaming tea. She held it out to him. Their fingers brushed as he took it, a jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. His gray eyes, so startlingly familiar in his son's face, met hers. They were not cold now. They were filled with a weary, desperate hope. "The horse would have caught a chill," she said, her tone clipped, refusing to acknowledge the gesture as anything personal. But they both knew it was. It was the first crack, the first hint of a thaw. That night, he did not retreat to his room. He sat at a table in the corner of the tap room, nursing a single ale, watching. He saw Elara move through the room, a kind word for one patron, a shared laugh with another. He saw how they respected her. He saw the life she had made. He had thought of her as a victim, a survivor. He saw now that she was more than that. She was a queen in her own small kingdom, her reign built on kindness and hard work, not birthright. He had also spent part of the afternoon writing. He had penned a long, detailed letter to his solicitor in London. It laid out Frederick's entire scheme, referencing the footman's deathbed confession, which had been formally recorded and witnessed. It instructed the solicitor to begin proceedings immediately, to have Frederick stripped of his position, his invitations revoked, his name blackened in every club and drawing room from Pall Mall to Mayfair. He gave John Coachman instructions to ride for the next town as soon as the road was passable and send it by the fastest post. There would be no public trial. The aristocracy did not air its dirtiest laundry in court. But it would be a social execution, absolute and final. He was clearing her name, not for his own sake, but for hers. And he was doing it from a distance, without her even knowing. It was an act of service, not of power. The next day, the rain finally stopped. A weak, watery sun broke through the clouds. The road, John Coachman reported, would be passable by noon. Time was up. Alistair found Elara by the riverbank behind the inn. The water was still high and brown, churning with debris from the storm. She was watching Thomas skip stones across the surface. He stood a respectful distance away. "The road is clear. I will be leaving soon." She did not turn. "Good. I hope you have a safe journey, Your Grace." The formality was back, a shield raised once more. "I have sent a letter to my solicitor," he said quietly. "Frederick will be dealt with. Your name will be cleared. I will make a public announcement that I was wrong, that I was deceived, and that you are, and always have been, my wife and the Duchess of Blackwood." She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And what do you expect that to achieve?" "I expect it to give you a choice," he said. "You can stay here, as Eleanor, and no one will ever bother you again. Your reputation will be restored, and I will ensure you have an income that will allow you and Thomas to live in comfort for the rest of your days. Or—" he hesitated, the next words the hardest he had ever had to say. "Or you can come home, with me." "Home?" she asked, a bitter smile touching her lips. "To Blackwood Manor? That was never my home. It was my prison. I will make it a home, he vowed, stepping closer. For you, for Thomas. It will be different. I will be different. I know I have no right to ask. I know I deserve nothing from you. But I am asking anyway. Not for the Duke of Blackwood, not for the title, but for our son, and for the man I am trying to become. He looked past her, at Thomas, who was now crouched at the water's edge, poking a stick into the mud. His son. A boy he barely knew, but for whom he already felt a fierce, protective love that was an agony in its intensity. He deserves to know who he is, Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. He deserves to know his father, even a father as flawed and foolish as I have been. Alara was silent for a long time, her gaze distant, fixed on the rushing water. He could see the war within her, the fear against the possibility, the past against the future, the deep, justified bitterness against the welfare of her son. If I came back, she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper, it would not be as your Duchess, not the one you remember. I will not be an ornament. I will not be silent. I will be your partner, or I will be nothing. Relief, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees, surged through him. It was not a yes, but it was a negotiation. It was the opening of a door he thought was sealed forever. I would not have it any other way, he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that was absolute. I do not want the Duchess I remember. I want you, Eleanor, Alara, the woman who bakes bread and carves toys and is stronger than anyone I have ever known. She looked from his face to her son and back again. A single tear traced a path through the flower dust on her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release, the first melting of a 5-year winter. Thomas, she called out, her voice clear and steady. The boy looked up. Come here, my love. There is someone I would like you to meet. This is your father. Thomas walked toward them, his expression serious. He stopped in front of Alistair and looked up, his gray eyes meeting his father's. Alistair's heart felt as if it might burst. He slowly, hesitantly, knelt in the mud, bringing himself down to the boy's level. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. He simply held out a hand, his palm rough and blistered from the axe. After a moment's consideration, Thomas reached out his own small, clean hand and placed it in his father's. The connection was electric, a circuit completed after 5 long, dark years. Alistair looked up at Alara, his eyes shining with unshed tears. She gave him a small, tremulous nod. It was not forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness had to be earned, moment by moment, day by day. But it was a beginning. It was a chance. And as he held his son's hand for the very first time, with the woman he loved standing beside them under a clearing sky, Alistair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood, felt that a chance was more than he deserved and everything he could ever hope for. It was the start of a long road back, not to the life they had lost, but to a new one they would build together.